the public participation of that agenda item. Now we'll be answering those questions. We can't go back and forth from the dais when you're asking. So I know I see some faces that are here for the first time, so I just wanted you to understand that. Okay, we'll start with Commissioner McBoy.
All right, well, thank you all for commenting. It is helpful, and I guess I'd like to say a few things that maybe address some of the different comments that are made. I think part of this whole issue, as I see it, and as I mentioned to somebody in the audience, that I'm a scientist. I don't have the luxury of ignoring information. It's just not something that I'm not trained to do. So, and I happen to be interested in climate change, so I'm around a lot of people and a lot of the thinking, and I read a lot to keep track of it. It's a reality of South Florida, having been involved in Everglades research for 2 decades, and seeing a situation where it is very much in the foreseeable future and is talked about regularly, that a big chunk of the system that I've dedicated most of my professional life to protecting won't be there. That's just something that I can't really get my head around, still. I mean, logically I can understand, yes, if sea level goes up, if climate changes, if precipitation drops a few inches a year and evaporation increases a little bit, you can't support a wetland. I get the facts. I don't have a problem putting that together. But I have a very hard time emotionally saying, well, you worked your whole life on this system and now you're believing that it's going to go away? And unfortunately, the answer is, whether I like it or not, yes, that's part of the situation. And I think with the city and with our position in South Florida, our elevation, our exposure to a changing world, it is very difficult emotionally to not keep doing what we used to do. To say the obvious things that we heard a lot from people, well, duh, we should do the short-term things. You know, there's holes in the roads, we should spend the money and fix them. Unfortunately, the context that we're in, and it's not that clear that it's a long-term context, it's the thoughts on how long-term it is. Certainly a 30-year bond, that already says you're looking at 30 years out. So you've got to be thinking about things that happen between now and 30 years. And some of that infrastructure, that 30 years is just to pay it off. Some of that infrastructure is going to be around for 50 years. Definitely you need to be thinking about, as a commission need to be thinking about, have we fully thought this thing through? Have we done our homework? I think Commissioner's already made some good points that, you know, this is challenging. We don't know how to do it. I happen to have a very different view. There are communities all across the country and other parts of the world. My family background comes from the Netherlands, which is, as you know, is very low. They are thinking very seriously about this. They can't afford to not think about it. And they're thinking about it in a very rational fashion. They're planning for it. They're doing things. That same approach, one of their head guys doing that, came to the US, figured that he would have no reception at all because people are much more skeptical about it here. He's been having sellout audiences of planners who are listening to what he has to say and saying that you can think about this. There are quantitative. That's what engineering does, is it takes uncertainty and works with it. All I'm suggesting is we are not at the point to put this on the ballot. And I want to be very clear, because I think there were some comments that might give the impression that I don't think the voters should vote on it. No, of course we should vote on it. I'm very much in favor of us as a community voting on this. I don't think we're ready to put this in front of the voters at this point. I don't think we as elected officials and as staff have done our due diligence of really researching what does our future look like in a 30-year, 50-year, what could it look like? There's certainly uncertainty, that we all understand, but there's quite a bit of known information. What does that look like? What are the costs associated with that? And as a community, which one of those things do we want to incorporate in our putting a bond out? So I think the suggestion to maybe move it November, whatever the time is it takes, to do a real thorough assessment of what are our risks, what are those costs of those risks, and what do we as a community choose to do about them, but with full information in front of us. That's the scenario that I think we want to be looking at.
Okay. Commissioner Marceau?
Okay, where to start? Let me first go back to we don't have the slide up anymore, but I wanted to kind of address some of that because we got an email late this afternoon. I don't know if anyone saw it. I happened to get it, and I hate to be sideswiped with last-minute information that I don't have time to research. However, I was able to go back to a study that was done August 8/11, August of 11, prior to me being here and a few of us being here, to get some of the information that Christopher McVoy sent late this afternoon. Approval of Lake Worth Climate Action Plan. Now looking at this, again, I didn't have a lot of time to research it, but I had the city clerk print everyone a copy. Looking at some of what was on the slide, Commissioner, and your recommendations, this study looks like the recommendations were made. And again, nothing was done at that point. But again, looking at the climate change and adaptable issues, they give you 3 different things that should have been done, and just reading it briefly, make Lake Worth resistant to impacts of climate change. To me, that one line doesn't say much. And if you read the other 2, again, they don't really tell you what to do. So going back, as far as recommendations, you know, I think this study speaks to your recommendations, unless again, I haven't had a lot of time to look at it. But it doesn't say much of what Lake Worth could actually do. And you made reference to other cities being sued. The city that you made reference to, you didn't mention it, but it's Chicago. I think Lake Worth and Chicago are 2 different animals. We already have to pay flood insurance because we are on the coast. And I think Chicago's issues were a little bit different. So as far as other cities being sued, you know, I think it's a far stretch to say that we compare to Chicago and that we could be sued, because we do sit at the base of water, and it is mandatory that we have flood insurance. So I think it's a little different. But again, I haven't had a lot of time to research this study. I would assume we paid for it back in August of 11. And again, the study to me, based on some of those things, don't say much. Now jumping forward to some of the comments, federal grants. We have been very aggressive in looking at federal grants, and all 3 of us have traveled to DC, Tallahassee, to actually lobby for Tiger grants, federal grants. There's a lot of money in the pipelines, a lot of money coming down. So I think when the mayor mentioned we haven't gotten any, we're going to get some. But we need to move forward. That's why we're actually borrowing in 3 different borrowings. So if we borrow in the first and we get grant money, that will offset and we won't have to use as much. As far as delaying, we haven't had infrastructure work done in over 40 years. I don't think financially or structurally we can afford to delay much longer. As far as public input, way before I sat on this dais, I sat there in that audience and I heard a lot of public input. And we've heard from every district. And again, if you want to share thoughts, you know, I encourage you to email us, call us. People stop in every day into my store to put more input in. But for 40 years, there hasn't been any infrastructure done. We've had a lot of input from all the different districts. Green element, you know, again, I'm all for climate issues, but I don't think that's what we're talking about today. We're talking about infrastructure needs that have not been addressed for a long, long time. And as far as taking a portion of this money and putting it somewhere else, and I see people shaking their heads, and you know, again, I invite you to come and talk to me. I'm willing to address your issues. You might tell me something different that I haven't heard, but again, we're here. We ask you to come and talk to us. We'll take meetings. There was something else that quite a few people talked about. I think that's it at the moment, but I know there'll come up a couple other things that, as we move forward.
Commissioner Cerruti?
Thank you, Mayor. I guess there was some comments, and if folks, if you haven't been in town very much, and especially the last couple of weeks when we did have these 4 local district workshops, we had something that, it's in your backup material. There has been, since April 16th, 2013, that was an agenda item to discuss the roadway and utilities master plan. They call it RUMP. And at this time, the name Lake Worth 2020 wasn't created, but it was, I pronounce it, it's like rum with a P for you pirates. And so 16 times since then, this particular topic has been brought up in other public, either work sessions, special meetings, budget workshops, regular meetings, etc. And so all those dates are listed in the backup if you wanted to go back and take a look at them. So it's not just lately. And Mr. Tim, we love you, don't worry. We care for all of the residents equally, and I mean, I think that we do have everybody's interests at heart. We wouldn't be up here if we didn't. I honestly think that. We've had other discussions about breaking up this into different pieces and all that, and that's really what Commissioner Ambrose was just saying. The borrowings here are set up to be in 3 different times throughout a 5-year period. If we get some other outside funding alternatives and things come up, then that will directly reduce what we need to use. You don't have to use that. So those are options that we do have in front of us. I've been talking to a number of other folks that are new landlords in our city that have been taking care of some of our other less savory apartment buildings and things in town, and fixing them up and trying to bring the level of what they can rent them for up, and changing what's going on instead of what we've seen out there before with mattresses and furniture and all the rest of that stuff just being thrown out into the streets from time to time. So there are other good landlords coming in, and they see the value. We are the best value if you think about living near the coast, living near the interstate, living near the airport, and having close water and beaches and parks and golf course and all. There's no other place with the value that you can't have a house, as Mr. Blackman was saying, that has that value compared to around us. And there's a lot of very smart investor people that are recognizing that. They were just waiting for us to be a little more stable with our land development regulations, having an internal auditor in place, having a city manager who's focused with what our purposes are. And so they're on their way. They're coming in, and we'd like to have them support this. Again, nobody wants to pay more taxes. And I know that as far as even from my standpoint, but I can tell you, even if this was to go through and it goes to the max, my taxes will be far less than what I was paying in 2008 and 9. Far, far less. And I thought, hey, I'm getting property here, the values are coming up in the city, and then it took a big dive, worse than our surrounding areas. So it can't come up 3% a year for the homeownership. And you know, we have more, I guess, properties that are for rent or renter properties than permanent houses. And so that means there's more than 50%. So there's no homestead on those. And then of those that are left, and there was some statistics Mr. Tim was bringing out here, of the 48% that's non-rental, half of those are still paying a pretty good amount, and even half of those again aren't paying really any taxes. But they will all come up as well. So it's not the amount of people that you think that are paying zero. Everything's going to come up with this when it's around. And yes, some people are saying that improvement of infrastructure will not won't help improve the property values. That is completely false. if I'm driving around, and you can ask any of the realtors too, if they drive around and they're bumping over the potholes and they walk up to try to open up the front door and watch your step and it's like, those folks are gonna turn right around. They're not, well, that's not really, I don't think this place is worth what you say it is. So, that's just not logical in my mind. Can't raise the utility tax. I mean, we've been fighting hard to go the opposite direction. So, and from what I read in the paper, the supervisor of elections will not entertain referendums on the November ballot, all right? August actually is a fairly good time because we're going to have some pretty critical things on that ballot, along with a new governor or re-electing a governor. So I think plenty of people will be coming out for that. Okay. Again, the cost of money is one thing. We're always, you know, if you borrow money, if you borrow money on your house, it doesn't mean that you aren't gonna spend other money to paint it and maybe put into something extra. You are going to say, if I have my mortgage, it's not the amount of money you bought your mortgage for in the end run, it's gonna be more money than that. So that's always gonna be there when you're investing in your own property. So what do you say to people? What do you say to people that are looking at Lake Worth? What do you say to them if Lake Worth itself doesn't even invest in itself? What does that say to them? I believe in the city, and I would be personally, okay, I'm happy to pay more money, because it's still going to be way less than what it was before. So I hope we'll still keep talking about these things, and I've maybe answered a few of these questions here, but I think we've talked about this for more than a year or so. There's been the intentions. I know we've gotten emails and phone calls and all kinds of things relating to infrastructure, and we were hoping that staff and everybody else has tried to put something together diligently now, reaching a point where we need to take some action, and that's an action plan. Thank you.
So we'll give everybody one last parting comment here.
This is my shot. This is my shot.
It's your shot.
This is my
Then we're gonna vote.
We're gonna vote? Okay. Well, first of all, in my mind, what we're discussing tonight and what we're about to do is probably the single most important decision a commission has made in this city in its 100 years of existence. Now, for those who think that's kind of a dramatic statement, you know, I'd love to talk to you about that. But before I give my comments, which by the way were 45 pages and it ran about an hour and 19 minutes, I have tried to condense it down, and I'm going to try to speak. I'm going to try to speak from my heart, and the first thing I want to talk about is passion. Okay, Commissioner McVoy talked about his passion as a scientist and his belief system and his value systems, and I respect all of that. But the challenge that I have for Commissioner McVoy, and this is well put out there before I get into my hour and 19-minute diatribe, is that if I knew, if any of us knew, what specifically we could do to protect ourselves against some of the things that are being discussed that are probably going to be taking place in the next 30 to 50 years, and we could identify specific action items with specific price tags, then I'd say let's have that conversation and let's incorporate that. But the reality of it is, this city, at least in the last 10 years, has had many conversations by people that I consider a lot smarter than I am on the issue of climate change, green initiatives, et cetera, et cetera. Yet, we've not come up with a solution, and these think tanks that are around the world that are trying to deal with this issues have not come up with solutions, but they're working hard at it. The problem we have in our city is that we, for the better part of 100 years, have been worried about other things other than our infrastructure. And I'm quite sure that when the other things were discussed and the other things were done, you know, there was probably a compelling reason why infrastructure wasn't addressed. But the bottom line is, we are where we are. It's not going to get better. It's not going to fix itself. Okay? And we're not in a financial position to go to our piggy bank and say, gee, here's $60 million that we need to do this project. Which is why we're asking you, the voters, to dig deeper than you may have wanted to dig. Now, my story. You all, at one point or another, probably heard the story about my 30 years of living here in Palm Beach County, and when I arrived here 30 years ago or so, the first three things that people told me when I told them I needed a place to live were, do not go to Lake Worth, stay away from Lake Worth, and avoid Lake Worth like the plague. Those were the first three things that every human being that I made contact with in this area told me. Well, I want to tell you something. It was quite by accident that I ended up living in Lake Worth. And I'm very, very thankful. I'm very thankful. Politics is something that I, as a casual observer, I'm very interested in national politics, world history, and all that. Never in 1,000 years would I've ever expected to be in politics myself. But as many of you people here have seen over the years, you get passionate about an issue or something happens and you run down to City Hall and, you know, some people, you know, come up and they talk about it or they complain about it. Other people get motivated to get into elected office to try to make a difference. I got involved in public service in Lake Worth through the Code Enforcement Board. That was a fluke. I was told if you want to get involved in local politics, find a volunteer board, go get on the board, learn your way around City Hall and run for office. So, I didn't know any better. So I ran down to the office. I said, hi, I was told to come in here and sign up for a volunteer board. They said, well, great, the only thing we have left is code enforcement. I said, what the heck is code enforcement? Never heard the term. Never heard the term code enforcement in my life. Never been touched by it, never experienced it, I had no idea what code enforcement was. But I signed up for the board anyway. And immediately went on into doing some research on what code enforcement is, what the Florida statutes are all about, etc., etc., etc. Came to my first meeting on the Code Enforcement Board, and the docket was very, very long. It was dozens of cases. And when you're new on a board, most people don't say a word. They just sit there and they're darn glad to be there. So I sat right there, I think maybe where John Zerdy was sitting. In fact, Glenn, weren't you part of that experience back in the day? And I listened as property owner after property owner after property owner would walk up and they would plead their case and they would talk about how they, the property owners, were victimized by the city. That somehow the city had wronged them. And most of the cases we were hearing were cases where property owners were looking for abatement of their fines. Because they were frustrated with the city, they had had it, I'm out of here. Their fines, and I'm going back to 2000, 1999, 2000, many of these fines then were in the triple digits, hundreds of thousands of dollars. And I'm sitting there scratching my head on my first meeting and saying, how can this be? How can this be? How can you accrue fines $50, $70, $80, $150, $200,000? How do you do that? Then you start doing the math. And you find out that these properties have been out of compliance for years. Well, I went to my next meeting, started asking questions. The bottom line is I learned very quickly why people were telling me, stay away from Lake Worth, avoid Lake Worth like the plague, etc., etc., etc. And I said, well, this is wrong. We need to do something about this. So I decided to run for office. And code enforcement was a big part of one of the things I wanted to address and see if we could make difference, to try to bring back our neighborhoods and put Lake Worth in a different trajectory. I came back, we did some positive things back in the day. Glenn, you were here. We put 6 new ordinances on the books within 30 days or 90 days of my my election, and people did something really kind of funny back in the day. They actually started paying their fines, but more importantly, people were complying to cases when they got caught up in code enforcement. So things were changing, okay? So I left office and I came back, and the reason I came back is because we had opportunities after opportunity after opportunity while I was out of office to do different things in our city, to put us on a different path, and we didn't do that. We had monies that were generated in the height of the housing market, unprecedented dollars that were taken in taxes in the city, unprecedented dollars. Yet there was never much of a conversation, if any, about dealing with infrastructure. Fixing a street, building a sidewalk. So I came back. And here we are. I've been talking about infrastructure for 15 years because it was the one thing that I felt very passionate about that was going to tie everything we needed together to show the outside world that we could get out of our own way as a political body, as an organization, and we could do things differently. So here we are. Here we are. We've done some things you've asked us to do, this commission right here. You've asked us to help with the LDRs. That's a process, took many years, but we finally brought the LDRs in for a landing. You asked us to deal with the Park of Commerce. We got the studies done to deal with the Park of Commerce. You asked us to deal with the electric rates. We've lowered the electric rates 3 years in a row. And to my understanding, it's the first time in the history of this city we've ever lowered the electric rates. Okay? Code enforcement, while it's still an issue for us today, we're working very hard to deal with code enforcement. And you can all expect some, I think this summer, some meetings in the community to explain how code enforcement works so everybody has a better understanding of what their expectation level might look like in the future. The bottom line is, I've heard everybody talk tonight, and I've heard people talk at our town meetings, and guess what? Most of you, in fact, all of you are absolutely correct from your own individual perspectives. The problem is, we have to make a decision about our future. We have to do it once and for all. We could no longer govern, what's the expression, paralysis by analysis? We keep kicking the can down the road. Every year, the potential for the elected body to change is there. So, what's the old joke? If you don't like what's going on in City Hall, wait around another year, it'll change. We've got to stop this. We have to stop this. That's how we got here. That's why people are frustrated. You talk about trust. You don't trust your government? Well, it's easier for us to take pot shots at Washington. That's really clear. But at the local level, how can we be so distrustful of each other? The reason we're so distrustful, I think, in large part, is because of this paralysis by analysis. Because we're not willing to cede in any way, shape, or form that maybe this person has a better idea than maybe I had, or this person brought something a little bit different that I hadn't thought of, that we could use and embrace and make things better. Those days, folks,